When Claire Jensen, a young mechanic from Wyoming, bought an old scrap of land once used for military testing, she thought she was getting a cheap place to store broken tractors. But the first time her boots hit the steel hatch buried beneath the soil, she realized the property was hiding something far bigger. What she uncovered wasn't just a relic of the Cold War, it was a time capsule of power, mystery, and fortune that would pull her into a story decades in the making. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories about hidden history and unbelievable discoveries spark your curiosity, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode reveals a secret even deeper than this one. The sun hadn't even touched the ridge when Claire Jensen slid the key into the rusted gate lock for the first time. The property was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the abandoned kind. 50 acres of dry Wyoming scrubland with a derelict fence, a collapsed barn, and a lot of nothing in between. She'd bought it in a foreclosure auction for $18,000. A mechanic's gamble, she told herself. A place to store parts? Maybe rebuild some old machines. But as she pushed open the gate and heard the hinges groan like a warning, something about the place felt off. Not haunted exactly, just forgotten too deeply. Claire was 29, red hair pulled back, jeans cuffed above worn work boots. She'd spent the last 7 years patching tractors and rewiring harvesters in her uncle's shop. But the shop was gone now, sold after his stroke. This land was supposed to be a restart, something she could own, build on, her own bay doors, her own rules. But as she walked across the overgrown lot, boots crunching over brittle grass and buried gravel, she felt the weight of something she hadn't expected, silence. The kind that hums. She stopped near a slope of earth where the barn had collapsed in on itself. Weeds were growing through the boards. Crows scattered from the roof as she approached. That's when she heard it. A faint, metallic clank, like something shifting below. Claire crouched low, brushing aside broken planks and dried thistle. Beneath the ruin was an odd-shaped square, smooth, metal. She cleared more and found a flat, rusted surface, almost like a door. Her fingers traced the edge. Steel, reinforced. And right at the center, a faint, nearly sand-blasted marking. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. No other markings, no instructions. Just a plate bolted over a welded seam. It didn't make sense. No missile bases were ever reported out here. No active military records. Nothing in the county registry but a vague notation. Utility infrastructure decommissioned. She walked the perimeter, finding thick, overgrown cables still running into the earth, half-buried, cut clean decades ago. The land might have been cheap, but something had once been built here and buried well. That night, Claire sat in her truck cab with the heater blowing and the flashlight trained on an old topo map she pulled from the glove box. The property had once bordered a testing range, she realized. Cold War era, maybe older. But nothing official was listed beyond 1,978. Still, the presence of a sealed hatch on privately owned land didn't sit right. Not with her. She tried to sleep in the truck bed, but kept waking up to the sound of wind through broken fencing, and that hum, faint, low, almost like an engine idling below her. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She poured her coffee from a thermos, grabbed her crowbar, and walked back to the hatch. If this land really did hide something the world had forgotten, she was going to find it. Claire didn't tell anyone what she'd found. Not yet. Not until she understood it herself. In the light of morning, the hatch looked even more out of place. A weathered slab of military steel half swallowed by decades of dirt and prairie grass. The old barn had collapsed right over it, like time itself had tried to keep it hidden. She cleared the rest of the boards, pulled weeds with gloved hands until her fingers ached, and uncovered the entire face of it. About 8 feet wide, 4 feet tall double doors, arched at the top, sealed shut with a rusted locking bar welded across the seam. She leaned in, placed her palm flat against it. cold, solid. The kind of reinforced metal she'd only ever seen on transport vehicles or secure trailers. Whoever built this hadn't intended for it to be reopened casually. For hours, she chipped away at the welds, sparks bouncing off her boots and shirt. Her arms burned, her back screamed, but Claire kept going. By midday, the Wyoming sun was hot enough to bake through her shirt, but she didn't stop. She pulled back for water and spotted something new, a faint groove around the edge. A hydraulic seam. The doors hadn't just been sealed. They were designed to lock from the inside. That afternoon, as dust swirled around her ankles, she pulled into town to rent a portable grinder and heavy-duty winch. The clerk, an older man named Gus, narrowed his eyes as she paid cash. "You working on that old pasture lot outside town?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Clearing space. Found something weird under the barn." Gus hesitated. "That land's been passed around for decades. Government bought it in the 60s, then sold it off. Rumors say there's a bunker out there." Claire kept her voice even. "That's so," he nodded slowly. "My dad said men used to come in unmarked trucks, middle of the night. Never saw them during the day. Then one winter, everything just stopped. Base went dark. Never heard why." Claire loaded the grinder into her truck without answering. She didn't believe in ghost stories or conspiracy junk, but her gut told her one thing: this wasn't just a root cellar or a storm shelter. This was something bigger. Purposeful. Back at the site, she anchored the winch to her truck bumper and began grinding the final welds. The sparks hissed and danced in the fading light. Her shoulders trembled from exhaustion. Her hands blistered beneath her gloves. But just before sunset, with one last tug from the winch, she heard it. A deep, mechanical groan. The bar broke loose. The steel creaked. She stepped back, heart thudding. The hatch shifted just barely, enough to let a whisper of cold air slip out. It smelled like oil, dust, machinery, history. Claire stood there in silence, one hand resting on the seam, the other clenched tight. She could leave. Call someone. Report it. But she didn't. She pulled the doors open and stared into darkness. The air that escaped the hatch was colder than it should have been. Not just underground cool, but preserved. Still, the kind of air that hadn't moved in decades. Claire stood at the edge, flashlight in one hand, the other resting on the side of the open steel frame. Her boots hovered above the concrete ramp leading down into the dark. She listened, no wind, no sound, just the faint echo of her breath and a slow drip of water somewhere far below. She took the first step. Her flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing a narrow corridor that sloped gently downward. The walls were smooth, poured concrete, embedded with rusted brackets and faded yellow safety stripes. Old wires snaked along the ceiling, many of them frayed or hanging. Every 20 feet, there was a dented metal panel or an emergency phone box, long since dead. It didn't feel like a bunker. It felt like an artery, a pathway that had once carried people, power, secrets. Claire walked slowly, counting her steps. 50, then 75. At 100, she found a large metal door recessed into the wall. It had no handle, only a keypad, shattered and dark. She moved on. As the tunnel widened, the air grew denser, metallic, a mix of oil, ozone, and age. Her light caught something ahead, a wall of dust-coated glass panes, and beyond it, shadows of large, hulking shapes under canvas tarps. She reached the glass, wiped it with her sleeve, and froze. Vehicles. At least a dozen. Huge, square-framed beasts with wide wheels and angular bodies. Some looked like armored transports. Others like prototypes, experimental designs she didn't recognize. They were parked in tight formation, as if waiting for deployment that never came. The room stretched far beyond the reach of her light, and the silence around them was deafening. Claire turned, searching for a way in. Around the corner was a stairwell that led to a secondary level, a catwalk overlooking the chamber. She followed it up, her flashlight bobbing with each step. At the top, a small control room faced the chamber like a watchtower. Inside, she found a cracked leather chair, an old radio receiver, and a binder. The pages inside were fragile and yellowed, but legible. Inventory logs, serial numbers, names like Sentinel-class recovery unit and Model X-3 Arctic rover, all dated between 1964 and 1971. Her hands trembled as she flipped the pages. None of these vehicles had ever been released to the public. Some had no records online. Some didn't exist in any archive she knew. She sank into the old chair, breathing hard. Whatever this place was, it had been hidden for a reason, and preserved, almost perfectly, by time and silence. A forgotten chamber beneath forgotten land. Claire looked down into the vehicle bay, light catching the corner of a white placard affixed to the wall. Project. Silo. Authorized personnel. Only. Established. November 1963. Her pulse ticked louder in her ears. This wasn't just a discovery. It was history, buried alive, and she was the first person to awaken it. Claire barely slept that night. She tried wrapped in an old blanket in the back of her truck, boots still on, head buzzing, but every time her eyes shut, she saw the outline of those vehicles. Hulking silhouettes under canvas, dormant but not dead. When morning finally came, she poured gas into her generator, packed 2 flashlights, a pry bar, and 3 protein bars, and headed straight back down the hatch. This time, she wasn't tentative. She moved like she belonged there. The chamber greeted her with the same stillness, the same oil and steel smell, heavy in her lungs. She made her way back through the access tunnel and into the stairwell that led to the control deck. A switchboard lined the wall. Most of it was dead, but one switch clicked faintly when she tested it. She flipped it, and overhead, a series of old halogen floodlights stuttered, then flickered to life. The chamber glowed. Her breath caught. Now fully illuminated, the space was enormous. The underground ceiling arched at least 30 feet high, lined with steel beams and faded signage. Concrete lanes separated each row of vehicles, trucks, carriers, and odd hybrids with unfamiliar frames. She counted 12 in total, each with different markings. Some bore weathered flags. Others had serial numbers. One had Cyrillic writing scratched into the side, hastily spray-painted over. She descended from the catwalk slowly, her boots echoing across the smooth concrete. As she moved closer, the details sharpened. Reinforced axles, oversized tires, solar inlet panels, and thick, armored doors. These weren't ordinary vehicles. They were something between off-roaders and mobile bunkers, designed for survival or escape. She peeled back the canvas from one of them, a long, low vehicle with a matte green finish. Dust scattered. Beneath it was a nameplate, ArcLight X5, prototype. Long-range traversal platform, unauthorized for civilian use. She circled the vehicle slowly. Its tires were flat but intact. The door was sealed, but she found a latch release on the side. With a hiss of stale air, it opened. Inside was a cockpit straight out of a science fiction film, toggle switches, a radar scope, even a rotary dial handset bolted to the dash. A half-empty canteen sat in the cup holder. A clipboard with a yellowed checklist rested on the seat. Everything was frozen in time. Claire climbed in, brushing her hand along the steering column. There was a keyhole, but no key. She sat in the silence for a long moment. The kind of silence you only get when you're standing inside someone else's secret. She pulled the clipboard closer. At the bottom of the checklist was a final entry, scrawled in black ink. Status: stand by awaiting retrieval. Goosebumps rippled down her arms. This wasn't a junkyard. It was a vault. A sealed chamber designed to wait, and for what she wasn't sure. War? Catastrophe? A call that never came? She stepped back out, heart racing. There was more here. She could feel it in her bones. And she hadn't even scratched the surface yet. By the third day, Claire had begun documenting everything. She brought her camera, notepad, and a portable scanner she borrowed from the local library, pretending it was for vintage car parts. Every inch of the chamber was a puzzle, and she wanted to capture it before time or someone else tried to erase it again. The deeper she explored, the stranger it became. One storage bay held nothing but sealed wooden crates, stacked in tight rows, each stenciled in blocky black letters. Property of U.S. Army, do not open, Project Sentinel. Some had rotted slightly, their corners soft from decades of underground humidity. One had burst open at the base, revealing bundles of canvas maps, each wrapped in cellophane and tagged with coordinates spanning across Alaska, Siberia, and North Dakota. Claire sat cross-legged in the dust and unfurled one of the maps. It showed concentric circles, blast radius estimates, centered around what appeared to be decommissioned bases. Along the edges were handwritten notes, EVA routes, vehicle loadouts, fallback zones. It wasn't just infrastructure. This was Cold War contingency planning on a level she hadn't imagined. She opened more crates. Inside one, oxygen tanks and thermal blankets, stamped NASA subcontractor. In another, heavy-duty Geiger counters and lead-lined gloves. And then, tucked beneath a layer of wax paper, a folder sealed in thick plastic. Its label was simple, ominous. Declassification denied. Level 6. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were black and white photographs. Blurry. Grainy. Each showed what looked like the very vehicles parked downstairs in motion. Some were driving across snow-covered terrain. Others were loading unidentified cargo onto flatbeds. One image showed a man in uniform standing beside the Arclight X5, saluting. The same model Claire had climbed into just yesterday. The back of the photo had a single word scribbled in pencil. Griffin. Claire didn't know what it meant, but it made her stomach twist. These weren't prototypes. They were tested, used, deployed. She kept digging. Past the storage bay, she discovered a secondary hallway tighter, dustier. A sign above the door read, "Restricted command access only." The door was locked, but the hinge had rusted through. With a few kicks and a wrench, it gave. The hallway beyond was darker, less finished. Pipes snaked along the ceiling. Mold crept up the corners, but at the far end stood a thick blast door, half ajar. Beyond it, a room unlike any she'd seen. Old communications panels lined the walls, their lights long dead. At the center, a map table still covered in plastic overlays. Pushpins and markings stretched across the U.S. and Eastern Europe. On a nearby desk sat a radio log. Last entry dated April 10th, 1974. It read simply, "Silo 9 remains silent. No orders, no evac. Standing by." Claire sat in that room for what felt like hours, her breath echoing against cold concrete. This place had been left behind, not forgotten. Someone had chosen to bury it, to seal it, not because it failed, but because it had served its purpose. And now, half a century later, Claire was the only one listening to its ghosts. Claire had seen her share of strange machines. Her uncle once rebuilt a World War II tank just for the hell of it. She'd helped restore classic Cadillacs, stripped down tractors from the Dust Bowl, even Frankensteined a Camaro with a diesel heart. But nothing came close to what she was looking at now. She spent the next 2 days cataloging each vehicle in the chamber. The more she studied them, the more obvious it became. These machines weren't just experimental, they were ahead of their time. Every one of them had features she'd only ever seen in tech magazines or classified DARPA rumors. One had a gyroscopic stabilizer integrated directly into the chassis, a feature modern armored vehicles only recently began using. Another had solar-assisted auxiliary batteries, still holding trace voltage after 50 years underground. One even had sealed air intake systems for amphibious traversal. These were war machines not just made for combat, but for survival across ice, desert, flood, or fallout. Claire started calling them by the names she found etched into their sides. The Sentinel. A six-wheeled beast with armored plating thick enough to repel tank rounds. Its windshield was more slit than glass. The Phantom Mule. Compact, fast-looking, with mounts for gear and supply crates. Claire imagined it darting through ruined cities or snowfields, hauling critical payloads. The Griffin. That name again. Larger than the others, and clearly unfinished. Its frame was reinforced but half-assembled. No engine, just cables and mounts for something that was never installed. Inside its cabin, tucked into the glove compartment, she found something that stopped her cold. A photograph, black and white. A man in uniform, face mostly obscured by the lighting, but something about his jawline, the set of his mouth, made her freeze. On the back, written in faded ink, Lieutenant Culm. James W. Jensen, 1968. Her breath caught. Jensen. Her father's name, her hands began to shake. Her dad never talked about his military service, said it was paper pushing and base hopping. Nothing more. He'd died when she was 16, leaving behind a few medals, a box of folded uniforms, and silence. But this wasn't paperwork. This was his face in a top-secret military installation buried beneath the very land she had somehow inherited. She sat in the driver's seat of the Griffin, the photo on her lap, staring at the empty dash in front of her. It all felt impossible, like time had looped. She started thinking not just about machines and motors, but memory, legacy. Why her father had never said a word. Why he left no papers about this place. Had he tried to bury it? Had he wanted her to find it? Claire tucked the photo into her coat pocket and stepped outside the Griffin, heart pounding. And that's when she heard it for the first time in days. A voice, not from memory, not in her head, but echoing from the hatch. A voice she didn't recognize, muffled, calling down into the darkness. Hello? Is someone down there? Claire's flashlight swept toward the hatch entrance like a spotlight on instinct. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze mid-step, boots planted in the dust, pulse thudding in her ears. The voice echoed again, clearer this time. Hello? Anyone down there? It wasn't panicked. It wasn't official sounding either. Just calm, curious. Claire didn't answer at first. Instead, she climbed the metal stairs back to the surface. Slowly, silently. The photograph of her father still folded tightly in her coat pocket. She emerged into the late afternoon sun, blinking against the light. A man stood just outside the fence line. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Wore an old army field jacket, scuffed boots, and a flat cap pulled low against the Sunday. He leaned on a walking stick, but he didn't look frail. Just weathered, like someone who'd seen more than he ever talked about. You must be Claire, he said as she stepped into view. She didn't ask how he knew her name. Not yet. You with the county? He chuckled once, dry and quiet. No, I'm not here to shut you down. I'm here because I used to know what's under your boots. Claire stayed by the hatch, keeping her body between him and the entrance. Then you know this place isn't on any official records. He nodded. It wasn't supposed to be. We buried it deep. Not just physically, bureaucratically. Claire narrowed her eyes. Who are you? The man let the question hang for a second. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded ID badge encased in yellowing plastic. Silo Operations Level 3 tons. Merrick, I was an engineer, he said. Late 60s to 71. Helped design and retrofit some of the vehicles in your vault. Most of us thought it was just a defensive installation. But near the end, it became something else. Claire folded her arms. Why come now? Because I saw the lights, he said, gesturing toward the open hatch. No one's turned them on in 50 years. Not until you. She didn't answer. I thought it was gone for good, he said more softly. Thought maybe I imagined it all. But when I saw your name on the county parcel records, I had to see for myself. Claire felt her heart skip. You knew my father? Merrick's face changed just for a second. A flicker of guilt. Or pain. James Jensen was more than just a soldier, he said. He was one of the few who questioned what we were building. He tried to stop it from going operational. Claire's voice tightened. From going what? Merrick looked toward the hatch. That base wasn't just about transportation or survival. It was a prototype. For mobile command. For continuity of government if the world ever ended. And the Griffin? She asked, quietly. He sighed. The Griffin was the last of them. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was designed to be a moving vault, with biometric keys, one of which belonged to your father. The wind shifted around them. I don't know why he never told you, Merrick added. But I know he left something in there. Something meant for you. But listen to me, Claire. You can't go public with this. Not yet. She stared him down. Why? Because the government may have forgotten this place. But not everyone did. And if word gets out what's down there, what you found, someone's going to come looking. The next morning, Claire sat at her kitchen table with a laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor in the search bar. She'd barely slept since the encounter with Merrick. His warning had been clear, but so had the unshakable feeling in her gut. If this place really was what he said, a Cold War failsafe, engineered to survive the end of the world, it wouldn't stay secret forever. And she wasn't the only one who knew anymore. She hadn't told anyone. Not the locals. Not the auto forum she used for parts swaps. But somehow, the news got out anyway. It started with a DM on her shop's social page, a collector in Arizona offering to buy any military surplus vehicles or base components. Then another message. Then 5 more. Within 2 days, her inbox was full of offers. $150 kelvins for any intact prototype. Will fly out with cash, serious buyer. Name your price for the Griffin. It spiraled fast. A popular YouTuber known for restoring tanks somehow got wind of the story and posted a video about the Wyoming missile base hoax. But even that skepticism stirred more interest. Claire's property became a digital mystery. GPS coordinates blurred. Wild theories thrown around. Forums flooded with speculation. Some said it was a testing site. Others claimed she'd faked it all for clout. But a few were dangerously accurate. Then came the lawyers. 2 men in suits showed up at her fence 3 days later. Badges displayed, polite but insistent. Claimed to represent a historical preservation agency working with the Department of Defense. Wanted to inspect the site. Wanted access. Claire didn't let them past the gate. That night, she met Merrick again at a diner outside town. They're not here for history, he said, stirring cold coffee. They're here to make sure it stays buried. Claire leaned in. Why the secrecy? Why bury vehicles if they weren't a threat? He looked at her, tired. Because the Griffin wasn't just a machine. It was a contingency. One built by people who thought the government might not survive a nuclear event. It could house data, launch encrypted communications, even store genetic material. It was meant to restart civilization if everything else failed. Claire sat back, stunned. And the other vehicles? She asked. Support units. Mobile bunkers, designed to carry the last few people who mattered. And my father was one of them? Merrick didn't answer. Just stared at her until she looked away. Later that night, Claire stood in the chamber again, hands deep in her coat pockets, staring at the Griffin. The photo of her father now sat taped to its dashboard. Offers kept pouring in, now reaching into the millions. Enough to start 10 shops. Enough to disappear and never work again. But her father hadn't buried this place for profit. He'd hidden it for a reason. She pressed her palm to the Griffin's metal flank. It wasn't just about money anymore. This was legacy, and she wasn't going to let anyone buy it away. The Griffin had been sitting silently for over 50 years. Dust layered its exterior like a second skin. The cabin, cold and skeletal, offered no clues beyond the photograph of her father and the clipboard of forgotten checklists. Claire had memorized every inch of it, every wire and panel, every bolt that didn't belong. But something Merrick said in that diner haunted her. He left something in there. Something meant for you. It wasn't in the glove box. Not under the seats. Not in the sealed dash compartment, which she'd pried open with a flathead and found empty but for a cracked fuse. She stood before the Griffin now, the chamber around her lit only by her generator and a string of shop lights she'd rigged along the rafters. Outside, the Wyoming sky was snow-gray and heavy. Inside, the air was dry and still. A tomb, patiently waiting. Claire climbed into the driver's seat, exhaled slowly, and let her fingers drift across the console one last time. Her eyes stopped on a faint panel behind the center lever, something almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A cut seam in the metal, barely perceptible. She pressed against it. Click! A hidden panel opened with a hiss. Inside was a biometric scanner, the glass faintly glowing green, miraculously still drawing power. Her hands trembled. She pressed her thumb against it. The scanner beeped once. Then, access granted, command override initiated. The seat beneath her vibrated. Lights flickered to life on the dashboard. Fans whirred softly. Claire's heart leapt into her throat. A hidden compartment in the rear cabin popped open with a slow hydraulic hiss. Inside, a steel case, locked with a dial code. On its face, one word scratched into the metal. Jensen. She stared at it, breath shallow. Slowly, she dialed the numbers her father's birthday. The latch clicked open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, rectangular device, sleek and black, no larger than a VHS tape. An old military-grade storage drive marked CIV Pulse. And beneath it, a letter, handwritten, folded in thirds. She opened it with trembling hands. Claire, if you're reading this, it means the Griffin is awake, and I'm gone. What's inside this drive isn't just data. It's a blueprint for something better. After the Cold War, there were people who believed the world couldn't be trusted with what we built. But I believed you could be. I tried to keep this buried until the right hands found it. I guess I believed in fate more than I admitted. This was never about war. It was about rebuilding. I'm proud of you. Dad. Claire pressed the letter to her chest, eyes stinging. Outside the bunker, the first flakes of snow had begun to fall. But in that underground chamber, warmth bloomed behind her ribs, a quiet, trembling fire lit not by discovery, but by trust. She looked at the drive, then at the Griffin. It wasn't the end of a mystery. It was the beginning of a mission. The storm rolled in hard that night, snow piling in drifts against the gate as Claire huddled in the Griffin's cabin, the ancient generator humming above. She hadn't told anyone about the drive. Not Merrick. Not the collectors still flooding her inbox. Not even the auto forums, where threads speculated wildly about the redhead with the hidden Cold War tank vault. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about protecting what her father had trusted her to find. She plugged the drive into her laptop using an old military adapter. Merrick helped her cobble together from spare parts. The files blinked to life one by one. Encrypted schematics, engineering blueprints, survival protocols, deployment logs, and then at the heart of it all, Project CIV Pulse. Claire read through the files slowly, heart pounding. The Griffin was more than a vehicle. It was a mobile seed vault, a decentralized backup of humanity's scientific, cultural, and biological records. Inside the shell she'd nearly scrapped for metal were systems designed to power critical databases in a post-collapse world, energy grids, agricultural data, even human genome sequences. It was Noah's Ark, on wheels, and someone had decided it was too dangerous to exist. No wonder her father buried it. No wonder he'd said the world wasn't ready. Claire sat back in the driver's seat, staring at the blinking cursor on her screen. A single command prompt awaited her choice. Reactivate archive? She hovered over the keyboard, then closed the laptop. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Claire went quiet. She turned down every offer politely, at first, then firmly. She replaced the hatch with a custom-welded locking system and ran fiber cameras into the tunnel for security. Merrick came by twice, the second time bringing an old blueprint of the original construction site. He didn't ask about the drive. He just helped her reseal the command room and left a worn leather notebook behind. Inside were handwritten notes, names, locations of other possible sleeping sites. Claire hired Leo, a kid from town who'd always asked too many questions at the scrapyard, and started training him. Not just in welding or diagnostics, but in quiet things. How to catalog by touch. How to listen to a machine's hum and hear when it was off. How to tell when something old still had something to say. She told him one day, "This isn't just about fixing, it's about remembering." And he understood. The snow melted, and spring returned to the plains. The chamber remained sealed, quiet and patient. But above it, something bloomed. Not just new grass or fresh gravel for the worksite. Claire was slowly rebuilding, but something more vital, purpose. She never spoke on camera, never gave an interview. But word spread anyway, a whisper network of people who had seen things buried, who remembered projects that had vanished from maps. Some came with photos, others with blueprints, a few just with stories, and Claire listened to every single one. Because the Griffin wasn't just her father's unfinished legacy anymore. It was hers now, too. And if the world ever forgot what it nearly lost, she would be ready to help it remember.